Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome to Season 2 Part 2. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. Todoroki slowly opened his eyes, feeling the light sting them. He could feel the soft sensation of a bed around him. And through his blurry vision he could make out the white walls that were surrounding him. Even though he couldn't see anything clearly, he could tell that he was in the infirmary. The atmosphere told him as much. So you're finally awake. It took you long enough, a calm voice then uttered. Todoroki was surprised to hear this. As he turned his expression towards the source of the voice, his vision was blurry. But he could still tell who this was. Midoriya, what are you doing here? The bi-colored teen asked, his voice showing that he was very confused. Izuku didn't seem to give a reaction to this. As he said, I came to see if you were still alive. That was a pretty big blast, you know. Besides, you're not the only one who took damage. With a calm voice. As he held his right arm up, Todoroki was confused by this at first. But upon closer inspection he could see that Izuku's right arm was covered in a bandage. This made his confusion turn into shock. The green-haired boy was super durable. Even invincible as far as he was concerned. The only thing that has been able to put a dent onto Izuku was the Namu from the USJ. So seeing this was honestly shocking. Todoroki was deep into his thoughts, but was quickly cut off when Izuku spoke. You were right, Todoroki. You were right about me, the green-haired boy said, his voice sounding like it was more vulnerable for some reason. You said that I didn't want to face you. And you were right, I didn't want to face you. And it's because I was afraid of you. Izuku then continued, his voice sounding the same as before. Todoroki was confused by all of this. He did hear Izuku say something about being afraid earlier, but he didn't think that he actually meant it. You're the strongest person that I know. You're the son of Omni-Man. What do you have to be afraid of? Todoroki asked, his voice showing that he couldn't understand what Izuku was talking about. The green-haired boy didn't change his posture at all, as he responded by saying, ever since I saw your first performance in the battle simulation I had one thought. That you were really strong. That thought was more amplified the more that I observed you. And eventually it turned into fear. I may be strong, but your technique closed the gap between us. You nearly had me with that ice wall. And I am pretty sure that if you had started using your flames before the festival you would have won. With the same vulnerable voice, Todoroki was once again shocked. It was weird enough to hear Izuku admit that he was afraid, but it was even weirder to hear him say that he was afraid of him. Not only that, he claimed that his technique was superior. There was one other thing, however, that caught his interest. The match, the bi-colored teen said, but ended up stopping himself in the middle of it. Izuku immediately knew what Todoroki was about to ask. So he continued, lose? Yes, you did. That blast launched you out of the ring. I only managed to remain because I used my flight to fight against it, the green-haired boy said, his voice being much calmer now. Todoroki turned his blurry vision towards his feet upon hearing this. Lowering his head in shame, he had spoken with such confidence, such arrogance, about the fact that he would defeat Izuku, but it was all for naught. In the end his efforts amounted to nothing, for he could do nothing more than scratch the green-haired boy. You claimed that I was the strongest person that you knew. And I feel something similar towards you. When I said that you would have won if you had used your flames, I really meant it. You had me on the ropes for the majority of our match. One wrong move and I would have lost. You are easily the toughest opponent that I have faced so far, Izuku then said, his voice sounding as calm as it did before. Todoroki was confused by this. As he turned his blurry vision towards the green-haired boy, Izuku stood up from his seat, looking straight at the bi-colored teen. Until he raised his hand towards him, Todoroki was confused, for he couldn't tell what Izuku was trying to do. Until he spoke up, I'm not saying that we need to be friends, but I will happily accept it if you're okay with it. This is my way of showing respect to you. A respect between two teens with strong fathers, the green-haired boy said, his voice being back to its usual joyous tone. Todoroki was once again shocked, but not nearly as much as when his vision finally became clear. What he saw was that Izuku was holding his hand out for a handshake, with a smile plastered onto his face. This action was alien to Todoroki, for hadn't experienced anything like this before. One thing was certain, however. It was that Izuku wasn't the arrogant person that he seemed like at the start of the festival. He was someone that cared for his friends. And he had his own kinds of issues. The bi-colored shook his classmate's hand after a few seconds, more or less showing that they were friends. The green-haired boy smiled even more upon seeing this, before he began walking towards the infirmary door. Midoriya, Todoroki then said, stopping Izuku dead in his tracks. "You have my respect too," the bi-colored teen then finished, his usually cold voice showing a hint of joy for the first time. Izuku was happy to hear this, as he nodded in affirmation before leaving through the door. The matches went one way or the other. Izuku faced off against Ada, but there wasn't much that the blue-haired teen could do. Izuku did give Ada some credit, for he had managed to get in a good hit thanks to his new move. But he still ended up losing to the green-haired boy. Bakugo also went on a streak of victories, eventually leading to the fated battle in the final match. It had been pushed back for too long, but it was finally time. They have never faced each other before, for Izuku had actively avoided a direct confrontation, but there was no way around it this time. They are both strong. They are both mentored by a powerful hero. And it's finally time to see who stands above the other. Class 1 were excited, all in eager anticipation of the match. They also wanted to see the results, and they wondered who was going to win. "I'd say that they're evenly matched," Ajiro said, sounding like he was trying to figure out what would happen. Bakugo almost stole Deku's headband during the cavalry battle, "So you might be right," Uraraka then responded, sounding like she was unsure. She knew of Izuku's strength, but she had also experienced Bakugo's firsthand. As far as she knew right now, it was anyone's game. "Your words are nothing but nonsense," a cold voice then spoke up, responding to the statements of both Ajiro and Uraraka. Everyone was confused by this, as they turned their heads to see who it was. It was Todoroki, and he looked as cold as always. "As someone who has faced Midoriya, I can assure you that he'll win this match," the bi-colored teen then continued, his voice showing no change in the slightest. Everyone looked surprised to hear this. It made sense for someone to believe that the person they lost to would continue to win, but they didn't expect it to come out of Todoroki. The class was silent for a few seconds after hearing this, until someone else spoke up. "Well, as someone who has faced Bakugo, I can assure that Midoriya has met his match," they said. Everyone turned once more, only to see that it was Kirishima who had spoken up. The class was once again surprised. They knew that the redhead would support Bakugo for the same reason as Todoroki, but they sensed something else. Kirishima spoke as if he recognized that Bakugo was strong, while also recognizing Izuku's strength. His words didn't speak in favor of anyone. He was saying that both fighters were strong enough to win. The class was silent after hearing this. They weren't sure of who to agree with, for they honestly didn't know who was stronger. There was only one way to find out who is stronger, and that is to observe the match. Right after that last fact was established, the fighters gathered in the ring. President Mike introduced them both with a fiery passion, much to the audience's content, as the teens stared each other down in silence. To most of the observers it looked just like any other competition, but a select few knew that there was more at play. Class 1 knew of Izuku and Bakugo's history, and the impact that this battle would have. But there were two who knew something more. Nolan and All Might knew that this would end up as more than just a friendly competition. It was a clash between their successors, Omni-Man's son or All Might's successor, Izuku or Bakugo, who is going to be the next symbol of peace. A deep silence followed the introductions, one that made the air seem thick, until the starting flare was fired. "Begin," Midnight shouted, and the teens didn't hesitate for a second. Izuku flew at top speed towards Bakugo, and the blonde used his explosions to charge at a similar speed. The distance between them was closed in what seemed to be an instant, leading to them both winding up for their opening move. What followed was the sound of a collision, filling the arena. The entire audience was stunned, both at the speed and the attack. If they ever questioned whether this was an even match or not, they now got their answer. The first strike belonged to Bakugo, as he fired a powerful explosion into Izuku's face. The green-haired boy was sent back, but he quickly recovered by using his flight. He then charged in for a punch, only to have it be avoided before taking another explosion. Everyone was once again stunned by this turn of events. At first it looked like they were evenly matched, but that didn't look to be the case. Izuku had gotten hit by Bakugo twice, and he has been unable to land a hit of his own. Izuku was a little shocked himself. Bakugo's explosions were stronger than he remembered. He couldn't tell if the blonde had trained really hard or something else was going on. Izuku observed Bakugo further, until he noticed something critical. The blonde's hands were covered in burns, and they looked like they were trembling with pain. The green-haired boy finally understood why Bakugo hadn't followed up any of his previous attacks. He was suffering horrendous backlash from using such big explosions. This was a good thing, for it meant that Izuku just had to tire his opponent out. If he withstands everything that gets thrown at him, he can win without fighting. "Don't you dare do it, Deku," Bakugo shouted, sounding just as aggressive as he usually did. Izuku was confused by this. As he looked at the blonde and asked, "What are you talking about?" The green-haired boy asked, sounding confused as he spoke. Bakugo got even more furious after hearing this. As he shouted, "You are holding back on me and everyone else. For the entirety of the festival you've either avoided combat or not taken anyone seriously. Stop looking down on everyone. Fight me seriously." With more aggression in his voice, Izuku was dumbfounded after hearing this. As he looked at Bakugo and asked, "Do you want to die or something?" With a voice that showed his own hint of aggression, Bakugo just looked more angry upon hearing this. As he shouted, "Stop acting high and mighty, you're not a god." Izuku was a little annoyed upon hearing this. As he responded by saying, "Compared to you, I am a god." With an annoyed voice, Bakugo clenched his fists hard upon hearing this. As he said, "Oh please. You bleed just like everyone else." With a more quiet, yet aggressive, tone this time, Izuku scoffed after hearing this, almost laughing at Bakugo's words, before he said, "All right, make me bleed, then I'll take you seriously." As he crossed his arms, this action angered the blonde even further. As he charged in once again, Izuku didn't answer his charge. He just stood his ground with an expressionless face. The clash that followed was very destructive. Bakugo kept firing his most powerful explosions at the green-haired boy, hurting himself more with each one, but it barely showed any result. Izuku just took them all with seemingly no problems, the only hints of damage being just a few marks. All Might and Nolan had different reactions to this clash. The blonde hero was getting worried, for Bakugo was willingly breaking himself in an attempt to hit his opponent. Meanwhile, Nolan was reacting in a different way. He knew exactly what Izuku was doing, and he also knew the truth behind it. "It would appear that your son is more or less unharmed," All Might stated, his voice only hinting at the concern he held. Nolan didn't take his eyes away from the match, as he responded by saying, "Izuku is really tough, but I can tell that this is actually reaching him. Bakugo is far stronger than I imagined, but he will incapacitate himself long before Izuku." With a calm voice, All Might was surprised to hear Nolan give praise to Bakugo, but that was quickly shot down when he heard the other part. It was true. The blonde was harming himself far more than his opponent. At this rate he will lose the match. The fight raged on, with Bakugo throwing one earth-shattering explosion after the other. Izuku still hadn't fought back against it, but he was starting to get worried. He could tell that the blonde was slowly reaching his limit, but he felt that his body was getting there too. It was still a long way to go, and it was certainly enough to win, but he couldn't afford to take any chances. All it took was one slightly stronger explosion. Then he could be in trouble. Bakugo threw another explosion, but it stopped before it could land. The smoke cleared to reveal that Izuku had caught the blonde by the wrist, his expression showing that he's had enough of this. The green-haired boy didn't say a word. His expression said it all, as he wound back for the finishing blow. However, right before he could launch it, Bakugo bellowed, "Damn it, fight me seriously," before doing the most unexpected thing. A loud bang was heard, sending a shockwave across the arena. As Izuku was launched back, "That human, how did he?" Nolan muttered, his voice showing nothing but pure shock. The shock was something that everyone watching felt, for Bakugo had done something that they first thought to be impossible. The blonde didn't use an explosion against Izuku. He punched him. He punched him in the face, with enough force to both break his own arm and send the green-haired boy flying. The blonde clenched his teeth and trembled from the pain of his broken arm. As Izuku was pulling himself back, he had managed to stop himself from flying out of the ring, but he ended up a mere centimeters away from the edge, the spot where Bakugo had hit him. His cheek was swelling and searing with pain. Izuku lightly touched the bruise, before spitting some blood onto the ground. "There. I made you bleed. Do you get it now? You're no different than the rest of us. You're no god. You're not invincible. So fight me already." Bakugo then shouted, his voice showing how much pain he was in. Izuku was in shock. Bakugo hadn't just made him bleed. He had done it with his own fist. He had harmed him with nothing but his own strength, which could only mean one thing: Bakugo could be considered an equal. And who's to say that there aren't a lot more out there? Izuku grinned widely upon realizing this. As he spoke up, "I made you a promise, and you made me bleed. I'll get serious with you, but prepare to lose." "Kaken," the green-haired boy shouted, his voice beaming with excitement. Bakugo responded to this with a grin of his own, as he bellowed, "In your dreams, Deku." Before taking his stance once more, both fighters faced each other with a smile, both declaring that they were going to give it their all. One thing was now made clear to the audience: This was the final clash. The teens stared each other down. No one moving a single muscle. They were waiting for the right moment. The one that would assure them victory. Everything was still. Until a gust of wind blew past them. That is when they, at the same time, launched themselves at each other with a faster speed than ever before. Everyone was in awe for every second that transpired. The teens were smiling during the entirety of the clash. It was as if they had both been waiting for this, and that they accepted each other as rivals. The two inched closer to each other, until contact was finally made. A massive explosion erupted, far bigger than the one in the second round, shaking and cracking the entire stadium. Many audience members began to duck and take cover, fearing the destruction was caused by the combined power of the teens. The rumbling slowly subsided, however, and everyone proceeded to get back up. The ring was covered in a thick layer of smoke, masking both contenders within it. Midnight managed to get back on her feet before straining her eyes to see the results. What she saw shocked her deeply, so much so that she froze. Eventually, she regained her composure before announcing, "Both students are out of bounds. It's a draw." To a stunned audience, normally a draw would be settled with a rematch of sorts. But that didn't happen this time, out of fear that their clash would lead to another display of destruction, and out of consideration for the students' injuries. The teachers decided that the festival would end with both Bakugo and Izuku as its joint winners. Both teens were taken to the infirmary after the match to treat their injuries. Izuku only needed some bandages, while Bakugo had to put his broken arm in a sling. After that, they had the award ceremony, which ended up being very awkward with two people standing on the first place podium. The teens were then swarmed by their classmates, all praising them for their accomplishments. Bakugo and Izuku ended up being friendly to each other, and people noticed that the green-haired boy had returned to his usual friendly self. The students happily bickered with each other, until it was broken by Bakugo. "Hey, Deku, we need to talk," the blonde said, his voice being very serious. Izuku was confused by this, but he followed Bakugo after hearing how serious he was. The green-haired boy followed the blonde to a locker room, a place where they would be alone. "What is it that you wanted, Kaken?" Izuku asked, almost sounding a little concerned. Bakugo looked much calmer than he usually did, as he said, "Fess up, what the hell is going on with you?" with a tone befitting to that of an interrogation. Izuku was confused by this, as he asked, "What are you talking about?" with a calm voice. Izuku could tell that Bakugo was getting annoyed, but his voice didn't show it as he said, 10 months before you were both weak and quirkless, and now you're strong enough to take out an all-might killing weapon on your own. You may be Omni-Man's son, but I still don't buy how strong you've gotten in such a short amount of time." With the same voice as before, Izuku was once again shocked to hear this, for he never thought that he would end up in this situation. Bakugo's suspicions were justified, and he only had them because he happened to know Izuku before UA. The blonde probably suspected that Izuku has had his quirk for much longer, but kept it hidden, or it didn't work as Izuku explained, or there could even be some sort of foul play. The green-haired boy remained calm, despite the situation, because he knew that he wasn't the only one who had something to answer for. "I could say the exact same thing about you, Kaken. I can accept that your explosions have gotten stronger than they used to be, but no amount of training will ever make you strong enough to do this," Izuku said, as he pointed to the bruise on his cheek. Bakugo's reaction told Izuku that something was going on, for the blonde was suddenly getting nervous. "What is going on with you, and does it have something to do with All Might?" the green-haired boy asked, his voice being as calm as ever. Bakugo gave off another weird reaction, which Izuku took as confirmation about his connection to All Might. The teens were at a silent stalemate, and they both knew it. They both had secrets about their powers, ones that they couldn't share with the other. Whoever speaks first loses, for they have to expose themselves and trust that the other won't betray them. The silence went on for a long while, until one of them decided that they had enough. "All Might gave me his quirk. It's called One for All. It stockpiles power that I have access to. It doesn't just give me strength. It enhances the power of my quirk drastically," Bakugo said, his voice showing a hint of vulnerability. Izuku was shocked. Not only was Bakugo the first one to speak, he had All Might's quirk. Izuku didn't know what he was expecting. Maybe that All Might was training him in some weird way, but this was definitely something he didn't expect. "Wow, that was unexpected, but I guess it explains your situation," Izuku then said, his voice sounding like he was baffled. Bakugo was once again annoyed, only this time it showed in his voice. "Now it's your turn to share," the blonde said, his voice slowly returning to its usual aggression. Izuku scratched the back of his head with an awkward motion. He had to tell the truth. But how can he say it without sounding ridiculous? Eventually he sighed, deciding that the existence of aliens shouldn't be too far-fetched if there existed a quirk that could be passed on between different people. "I'm not human," the green-haired boy said, still unsure of how to properly phrase it. Bakugo's expression quickly turned baffled, unsure of how to process this information, as he exclaimed, "What? Outro. Thank you all for sticking around and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description. So feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates." Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video. So goodbye and have a divine day.